many of our churches and communities, we're in this weird space where we have this dilemma. Are we safe havens for people in need, or are we places that encourage one another towards spiritual or emotional growth? Are we sanctuaries for people who feel like refugees from the world? Anybody here ever feel like a refugee from the world? I know that I have. Where we don't always fit? Or do we also be a place where we stretch, a place where we engage the often uncomfortable work of being brave instead of safe? You see, this term safe space comes from the 1970s, when spaces were created for LGBTQ plus communities, for people whose lives were threatened. Space was a term applied to spaces that were set aside for people who lived in constant judgment and condemnation, sometimes with very real threats to their lives because of their existence. Places where they could find other people who were sharing that experience and that oppression, where they could vent and process and understand, maybe even grow together in a safe environment. The key words here, though, are very real threats to their life because of that existence. Unfortunately, like many ideas that are really good, safe space has sometimes morphed into something different. Sometimes today it can feel like people ask for safe space when people don't want to feel uncomfortable, or maybe feel like they just are too tired to deal with anything. But really, they've begun claiming safe space when really what they need is a place of rest. In response to this development, some organizations have begun creating a different kind of space. In addition to safe spaces for marginalized and threatened populations, organizations are creating spaces where people agree to be challenged. Imagine that. Where people agree to be introduced to new ideas or orientations, agree to be uncomfortable even. I want my popcorn at night. Take risks to try on new ways of thinking about the world, oftentimes with support. They are calling these spaces brave. While organizations like schools are affirming these spaces can be found almost anywhere, people agree to cultivate their lived examination in brave spaces. What they're cultivating is examining what we think we know, right? Ever heard of Jacquard's window? This window, if you looked at those old pane, it wouldn't be a pane like this because that would be a little too complicated, but those old four, there's stuff that everybody knows about us. There's stuff that only I know about myself. There's stuff that only you know about me. Threat. And there's stuff that neither one of us actually know, right? But that stuff that I think that I know, how would it be different if you were able to tell me what you know about me? How would it be different if I began examining those knowns and started bringing that edge down into that space of what is unknown to each of us? It's kind of like a world that is grappling with all of these different truths. Is Mountain Dew emblematic of a conservative cause? Or is it as a sign of the eroding health within mining communities? Right? It can be even small changes like, how do we decide which physical things stay in a beloved building? Not that I don't think that's happened here, right? It could be things that are more challenging, like that conversation that you might have with family over Labor Day. Today we're talking about cultivating brave spaces within faith communities, because here we are helped to become the people that we say we want to be. People connected to principles that encourage us to live lives of integrity and meaning. Because being brave is being willing to be uncomfortable. Being brave is testing our beliefs and ideas. Do these still fit who I want to be in the world? It is being willing to examine what I'm afraid of and ask whether or not that fear is holding me back. It is strengthening our listening and following muscles. Being brave is wrestling with the realities of our world, perhaps so that other people can be safe. Not others like us, but others like those actually living on the margins. For those of us that live on the margins, I want you to listen today at times as if you were the person in the room who was least marginalized. Because even if we come into these spaces with marginalizations, there is always some place where we have a little bit more power. And I'm asking us to use that power that we have to be able to help others, right? I want to start by telling you a story about Brave Space and how I came to know the power of it to transform my life and what I thought I knew about myself and the world. This is that knowing thing. Ugh. Never a comfortable conversation, but on it goes. As some of you might know, I helped to form the UU Prison Ministry of Illinois, UUPMI, as their minister, and I now work with them as a volunteer. The first ministerial request that I received when I started working for UUPMI was to perform a wedding for 2 men living at Rushville Detention Center. Initially, I was really exhilarated. This is exactly the kind of work that I applied for this job, affirming humanity of people, those people who are locked away, listening and bearing witness to their stories, affirming their part in the world, affirming that they are not forgotten. I got my uppity on. But then I found out that Rushville is a detention center for people who have served their prison sentences for sexually violent crimes. They're not released, however, because they are deemed too dangerous to be released without treatment. As a side note, it's actually called involuntary civil commitment. It is laws that come from the 1800s when men who wanted to get divorced put their wives away in mental institutions in order for that to be allowed. And this is how it's being used today. That's a different sermon, however. With that knowledge of who was locked up at Rushville, I'm ashamed to say that it took me 6 weeks to answer that initial letter. 6 weeks of somebody sitting in a cell waiting for someone to see them. I wrestled with what it means to marry people who have profoundly hurt others in such personal and sometimes indelible ways. Part of me was overwhelmed. My family has a history. I have a history. It weighed on me. I grappled with the uncomfortable truth that apparently I wanted to help people, but I wanted to help people who were locked up for the right reasons. The mother who stole milk for her baby, right? The person who was charged with murder, but only because they loaned their car to somebody else. True, that does happen here. Maybe someone who killed, but they killed out of self-defense. What did it mean to help those convicted of sexually violent crimes? So I took my concerns to the people that I worked with. I didn't know where else to go. The board of UUPMI. And they gently reminded me that I had to wrestle with the fact that I knew that public safety systems help to make society safe. See picture of Andy Griffith here. The board, as my co-collaborators, helped me to create a brave space where I found a new set of beliefs. I believe that all true crime is an abuse of power, using domination to control circumstances and people, and The type of crime committed does not lessen my obligation as a Unitarian Universalist to respect the worth and dignity of the people who are locked up. After grappling, I found myself driving to meet a couple to talk about being married. I moved into brave space because people who were locked up, people like M, one of the half of the first couple from Rushville, who actually boldly sued the system and said, I am here, I am human, I will be seen, I will be remembered. Go look up and see where Rushville is in Illinois if you want. Very far away from anything. This courage from M allowed me to learn. He stepped out to test the limits. He braved real threats and retaliations from people at Rushville. And he won not only for himself, but for others. I've married 8 couples there over the years. But it's because of their courage that I finally was able to stand in solidarity with them despite my baggage of what I knew. It was me who needed brave space to wrestle with my lightweight affirmation of our UU principle. Over the years, working together with UUPMI, we created brave spaces to see our knowings and to grow and be open to new possibilities that hadn't been visible before. I want to point out that M was not part of these brave conversations. He instigated them with his courage, but the work of change, the work of being brave, rested with me and the UUPMI board. Creating a brave space was our work to do, not his. It is a really odd thing that we need other people sometimes to create brave spaces. I can do this all by myself. I'm going to reflect decently as I run my errands or something. Not that that has ever happened to me. But the work of change, the work of being brave, it's important to know that it's work that needs to be done with other people. Because alone, we often simply conform to the comfortable ideas that we have created about an unexamined world. There was this psychologist named Solomon Asch a while ago who did some research on conformity, and he created experiments where he asked people to make super simple observations. He drew lines on a paper, some that were longer and some that were shorter. And all he wanted was for people to come in and tell him which were the longer lines and which were the shorter lines. So simple, right? Only he was a psychologist. So he hired actors to surround this person and say to the unsuspecting test subject that the longest lines were short and the shortest lines were long. In Asch's research, 65%, 2/3 of us, went along with the actors in the room. They agreed with the obvious. These are the short lines, these are the long lines. In order not to be different than the crowd, it's really hard to separate ourselves out. It's hard to think differently. As humans, we just want to go along, especially when we find our safe space, aka keep your ideas and beliefs all lined up in a row, because there I know I'm going to be safe. When you walked in those doors, you knew what to do. I just want to be safe. But Asch found another really interesting correlation. That was if even one of the other actors disagreed with the crowd, the research subject would hold their ground. He called this person a true partner. When you find a true partner to challenge what the status quo is, whatever that status quo is that you hear people mumbling about, you are much more likely to stand up for what you know is true. It took courage by M, but it also took courage by UUPMI to create that brave space that allowed me to step in and look and say, oh, you're my true partner. What I thought was real is an illusion. It may have elements in it that are real and true and fine and fact, but not all of it. The way that we have cobbled it together is not exactly how the system works. Maya Angelou reminds us that courage is the most important of all the virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. You can practice any virtue erratically, but nothing consistently without courage. Dr. Angelou reminds us that every good impulse towards compassion, towards truth, generosity, kindness, you can throw out even more. What are the virtues that you want to live in, right? Any of them will run into opposition at some point in your life. Without practice, exploring and being transformed, it will always be too easy to abandon your principles and take refuge in what is comfortable and familiar and safe. Sure, those longs are short in line. What the heck do I care? I'm just pulling a check here and going back to my classes when I'm done with this, right? Doesn't matter. Creating brave spaces takes courage because it is not safe. It is a place of disorientation and learning, risking and reaching to reorient to a new understanding of who you are, who the other person is, who the world is that we live within. It takes courage to point out what is wrong. When's the last time you stood up in a room full of people and said, I'm not sure I agree with that? Courage to be willing to see the world as it is from someone else's perspective. Oh, that's what you experience. Oof. Okay, I need to rethink this. Courage to speak up when it's going against the flow. Courage to listen to each other and hear the hard truths of others' lives. It takes courage to allow your faith community to be a place that is brave, because in being brave, it might just be messily human. Oh, no, I want to walk in here and be safe. This is my safe space. Is it? Is that the only thing that it is? Our churches need to be havens of brave space, especially now when so many different ideas are being forwarded as truth or fact even. I could go on a rant about politics, but I'm not going to. To continue living our values, or the climate change, or AI, oh my God. Our churches need to be havens of brave space, especially now when so many different ideas are being forwarded as truth or fact. To continue living our values, we need places where we can practice being brave, practice being true partners, while looking at our fears and responding rather than reacting. Places where we try on new things that might feel challenging, might feel really disorienting, might even feel uncomfortable, to learn to discern what is appropriate. This is not a new concept for your congregation. Being brave is something that you do, right? An organization that supports local organizations so that it will make a difference in the world, right? Going through that conversation, that has learned how to, and actively learned several times, how to have conversations with people with different political opinions, right? Right in that room, probably right in this room. I wasn't here, but I imagine that it was in some room. A congregation that shows up and speaks out and journeys with each other through unimaginable places. You've created brave spaces. What I'm asking is that you be intentional about that bravery, to act with courage in this community and beyond as true partners in this community and beyond. Practice here so it's less hard to do it out in the world. Every day now, a new chance is being set before you. As you move out into conversations and gatherings, take up intentionally creating brave spaces. Try on new ideas or orientations. Even if you try them on and you find out they don't fit, well, fine, they don't fit, but you wouldn't know unless you try them on. Take risks and offer different ways of thinking and being in the world. Be willing to be called out or called in. Spaces not devoid of challenge or even fear. Instead, spaces where with compassion, new ideas and ways of being true partners are welcomed. This does not need to be any more complicated than acknowledging a need for brave space when you're in a conversation. Wow, I'm edging into something here. I'm working with it. I heard this podcast. I watched this thing. I had this conversation with my child. Whatever. I need a space here where I can examine what's going on. I don't know the answers. Can you be a true partner with me? Would you journey with me in that space? In creating brave spaces with courage, our congregations become alive with purpose. When we sublimate our own need for comfort or safety in favor of someone else's ability to wrestle and to survive. Then we have created welcoming spaces of beloved community. Then we have affirmed justice and the worth and dignity of every single person. Imagine what this room would feel like to be able to walk in and say, I know I'm safe here, and I'm safe enough to be able to take a chance. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into that well, to this great turning that will lead again to love.
Visit us at UUSG.org.